Today I'm going to show how you can make this paranormal activity inspired scene in Blender. In this video, I'm going to show every step I took to create the scene. This includes modeling the props, putting the environment together, setting up the camera, animation, and more. By the end of this video, you should be able to make your very own paranormal activity inspired scene. Let's begin. First off, let's start with a basic layout of the scene. Add a plane and scale it accordingly. In most of my projects, I add a 180 centimeters or 5'11" tall human model so that I have a better sense of scale when working in my scene. First thing we are going to model is the bed's headboard. To do this, we add a cube, scale the width to around 20 centimeters, the height to around 160, and length around 150 centimeters. Then we are going to duplicate the cube, scale the height down, slightly scale the length and width up several centimeters, and give it a subdivision modifier with 3 levels. Then by pressing Ctrl and R, you can add a loop cut. If you scroll up on your mouse, you can add more loop cuts. We want to add loop cuts around all the edges of the cube. Now add a shade auto smooth, duplicate the first cube, place it at the top, and start to add a nice shape to the top of the headboard using loop cuts and scaling, and add a subdiv modifier to this cube too. Add cuts to all the edges of this mesh as we want it to look pretty sharp, as it's supposed to be a piece of wood. Now for the original mesh, add a loop cut on either side, another loop cut around the middle like so, and with the middle face press I for inset and drag the mouse to add an inner face as shown. Pull the face out slightly. Soon we're going to be using the Boolean modifier, but first let's add another cube, scale it down, and add 2 loop cuts crossing each other as shown. Then select the edges in each corner and delete them. Add 4 loop cuts as shown and scale them inward. Add a Boolean modifier to the mesh, make sure it's on difference. Select the eyedropper here and click on the star-shaped mesh. Select and bevel the 4 edges shown. Feel free to scale the shape to your liking. Add an array modifier, increase the count to 4, and change the factor on the x-axis. Apply the modifier. Now add a cube, add a bevel modifier with an amount of about 0.05, duplicate it for the other side. Now let's make a bed, add a plane, add a solidify modifier, put the offset to 1, and increase the thickness. Add a bevel modifier with 4 segments and change the amount accordingly. Delete the top face, add another solidify. Now add a cube, scale it to fit, add a bevel. Add a plane, subdivide the plane many times. Go to Physics and add a cloth modifier. Update the settings to the ones shown on screen. Play the animation and apply the cloth modifier. Add a solidify modifier. Add a subdiv modifier with 2 or more levels. Add another box, put it at the end of the bed, scale accordingly. Add a loop cut near the top, select the top faces and extrude. Add a bevel modifier. Add another plane, and do the same process that we did with the previous bed cover, except rotate the top part of the plane as shown. Using proportional editing, we can move segments of the cover to add more realism. Add a cube, subdivide it 1 time, add 4 more cuts as shown, click Auto Merge Vertices and put the threshold to 0.02. Select the top edges and drag them to the middle so they connect to the other edges. Do the same for the bottom edges. Add a subdiv, click on Simple, and apply the modifier. Add a cloth modifier and use the same settings as shown. Add another subdiv, choose Simple, and apply it. Test the animation, shade smooth, duplicate it, play the animation, and place them on the bed. You can make some smaller cushions using the same method. You can use proportional editing on the cushions if you want to improve them further. For the bedside table, I just simply added a bunch of cubes together, looked at my reference, scaled the cubes accordingly. Add a cylinder for the handle. Use the hand of the 3D character for size reference. Add a shade auto smooth and a subdiv, and adding loop cuts at the ends of the cylinder. Inset the faces at each end. And again. Add a cube. Duplicate and place them as shown. Add a bevel modifier. Select each part of the handle and duplicate it and place on the other drawer. Now select all the wooden parts of the table, press Ctrl J, press OK, and add a bevel modifier. Select % and have the width at about 0.13. Select the entire drawer, rotate it slightly, duplicate it, place it at the other side of the bed. Now add a cylinder, but this time put the vertices to 10, the radius to 0.1, and the depth to 0.2. Delete the bottom face. Add a subdiv with 2 levels. Shade auto smooth. Now for this part, I will let your creative juices flow. Using loop cuts and scaling, make yourself a nice shape for the lamp. For the lampshade, use a cylinder. Delete the top and bottom face. Select the top edges and extrude them inward. Do the same for the bottom edges. Add 2 loop cuts for the top and bottom as shown. Select the middle faces and scale inward slightly. Apply a subdiv with 2 levels, shade auto smooth. Select all the top vertices or edges and scale down. If your cushions are looking a bit pointy in certain parts like mine were, you can use proportional editing to get rid of the pointy bits. Just don't go overboard with it. I also scaled my lamp because I didn't like how small it was. Time to make some books. Get a cube, scale it to the size of a book. Add 2 loop cuts and scale them away from each other. Add another cut and place near the end. Delete the faces as shown, so you now have a book cover. Add a solidify to it and a bevel. For the pages, you can use a cube and scale it. Select the 3 visible faces, press Ctrl I, and delete the faces. If there's gaps, then drag the edges to the end as shown. Now select all the parts of the book and Ctrl J and press OK. Now rotate the book, duplicate, place it on the other table, rotate, scale. For added realism, you can add a bookmark and a pen holder using planes, loop cuts, and a shade smooth. Now we're going to build the room up by making a simple block out using, you guessed it, cubes and planes. Make sure to keep the character model in mind for size reference when making up the door and the walls. For the door frame, I got a plane, made its width around 2 inches and the height 2 inches above the door. Then with the knife tool, I cut from the top left corner to the corner of the door. Then extrude the edge as shown. Duplicated it, mirrored it on the x-axis. Selected both parts and joined them together. Then with auto merge verts on, I brought the verts together. I then extruded the edges of the plane towards the wall. Then using loop cuts, I made 1/2 inch indentations. Again, it's important to look at your reference when making anything in 3D software. Okay, now add a subdiv and shade smooth. Add 2 loop cuts and scale them towards the corners. Add another one to the other side of each corner as shown. Now add loop cuts to every edge of the frame. Now select the wall and make 2 cuts vertically and 1 horizontally so that we can delete a face for the doorway. You'll probably have to scale the door so that there aren't any gaps. For the next step, place the character model over the door so that we can make a correctly sized handle. First, add a plane, extrude it, make a 3x3 grid with loop cuts, delete the middle face. Add a cube and scale to fit inside the hole. Add a few cuts and move the edges so you have a curved latch as shown. Then auto smooth. Now add a cube, add a bevel. Set amount to percent, put the percent to around 1 and the segments to 2. Add a cylinder with 10 vertices. Add a subdiv with 2 levels. Delete the front face and add a cut near the other end. Scale down slightly, add a few supporting cuts. Now, again, I'm going to let you be a little creative. Using a plane, a subdiv, solidify, and loop cuts, I want you to make a visually accurate handle. It doesn't have to be perfect, just make sure you're looking at your references. A good tip is to use proportional editing to develop the curves. For the screws, we will add a cylinder, scale down, add a subdiv. Now using the knife tool, add 2 horizontal lines, inset the middle face, inset again slightly, then move it back slightly. Increase the subdiv levels if needed. Add 2 cuts and scale away from each other. Duplicate and place a screw near each corner as shown. For variation, rotate each screw independently. Select the entire handle and join it together. Now select the cursor and put it where the door hinges would be. Select every part of the door, including the latch. Hover over Set Origin and select Origin to 3D Cursor. Test the rotation of the door and look whether all parts of the door rotate together correctly. Move the door closer or away from the door frame if needed. Now let's add a wire coming out of the lamp. Add a Bezier curve with a radius of 0.1. Go in Edit mode, select all verts, delete the vertices. Now using the Draw tool, draw a line starting from the lamp and ending at the edge of the table as shown. Now go over to Object, Convert, and select Mesh. Now select all edges of the mesh and extrude 4 or 5 times and shade smooth to create the wire. As an optional prop, you can make a plant for the bedside table. However, I won't be teaching this part in this video. Instead, I will link a very good tutorial in the description. Thanks to Blender Vitals for this tutorial. Now let's make a plug socket. For this, you will need a diagram, which you can add using image reference in Blender. If you don't have a reference, just add a plane, add 3 loop cuts to one side, scale them inward so it looks rounded as shown. Then using more cuts, you can have a face in which you can slightly inset, then drag down slightly, then extrude inward. Delete the face, then add a mirror modifier, add a plane for the base, and extrude the edges. Select all the outer edges for the plug and extrude those. Scale it down using the hand as reference. Finally, place it in a good spot on the wall. Add a duplicate below. Add a cube for the base. Select all of it and join it together. Duplicate it and add to the other side of the bed. Using the skills you've learned so far, make yourself a light switch for the wall. Keep it simple, and remember, look at references. Now let's extend the walls, extrude the edges, and create the bedroom. Add some walls for the hallway, as we will need this room for our scene. Add a roof using a plane. Make sure it covers all the rooms. Press the eye icon on the plane so that you can see what you're working with going forward. Don't worry, the roof will still be in the scene during the render. Play around with the point light to get some nice lighting. Now open a new file, especially if you don't have a very powerful PC like me. Add a cube, add a plane, and subdivide a bunch of times. Rotate it as shown, lift it above the cube, add a subdiv with 2 levels. Add a cloth modifier, have the same settings that I show here. Rotate it a bit more if needed. Grab a few edges and pull them to create a wavy look. Increase the subdiv levels to 3. Play the animation. If you like the result, apply the modifiers. If not, you can play around with the rotation and play the animation again. Add another subdiv if your PC can handle it. Apply a solidify and increase the thickness. Now export the scene using .obj and then import it into the main file. Rotate and scale and place it onto the bed as shown. Delete the cube, set the origin to center of mass. Scale it to your liking. Now, create a skirting board using a plane, loop cuts, and looking at reference. Have the size of the board to around 2 meters long. It doesn't have to be too large, as we will be duplicating it anyway. Select an edge and press Ctrl B to bevel. Duplicate the boards, focus on your camera, make sure there is boards in every area that your camera can see. Now, we're going to make a mug prop, so add a cylinder with a radius and depth of 0.1, choose 8 vertices. Add a subdiv, delete the top face, auto smooth. Add some supporting loop cuts. Scale accordingly, extrude the top edge, add more supporting cuts. Shade smooth. Extrude the inner edge downward for the inside of the mug. Scale some more if needed. Select the top edges and scale out. Inset the bottom face, then delete. Add more supporting cuts where needed. Place on the table. Select the cursor and click where the handle will be. Add a plane. Scale the width. Start to extrude the plane bit by bit so that you have a handle shape. Make sure your viewport is on the X or Y axis whilst extruding. Add a solidify modifier. Add a subdiv. Shade smooth. Delete the faces at each end. Now move edges around. Add loop cuts. And once you're happy with the final shape, you can move it over to the hand and double-check the size of the mug. Finally, join the mug and the handle. You can duplicate the mug if you want. Rotate the duplicate for variation. To make the end of the bed more detailed, you can duplicate it, scale it to your preferred size, place it at one end as shown, add a loop cut 3/3 down, add another really close to it. Select it, as well as all the edges at the top, scale them in. Duplicate it and place at the other end. For more detail, add more loop cuts and more scaling. Just play around and see what you can make. As you can see, I made a panel by insetting the face, bringing it out a little bit, and beveling some edges. With the beveling, 2 segments was the best for a nice look and efficiency. When it comes to making all the materials for my scene, I firstly browsed free texture sites online and found the material sets I need. Then I went on shading, clicked on the shader, pressed Ctrl-Shift and T on the keyboard, and selected the texture set for that model. Pressing Ctrl-Shift and T will make Blender automatically assign the textures to the shader, as you can see. The Ctrl-Shift-T shortcut will also add a texture coordinate and mapping node. With this, we can scale the X, Y, and Z values. If you want to change the color of your material, you can add a mix color node. For my wall material, I wanted a green look, but you can pick anything you desire. For the majority of my materials, I added a grid material in shading before adding the actual material. This was so that I can check for any anomalies during the UV unwrapping stage. To make the grid material, you add an image texture, select New, and put the generated type to UV grid. As you can see with this model, there is some stretching. So let's fix that. Add the grid material to all the headboard models. Now for each model, select it, Ctrl-Alt and A, and apply the scale. We will have to do this for every model that we unwrap in this scene. This model changed its form after the scale being applied, so you can adjust it back to its original state by changing the amount in the bevel modifier. Now go in UV editing, Ctrl-A to select all the faces, press U for unwrap, select Smart UV Project. Do the same for the left cube, then duplicate it, then unwrap the rest. If you see any stretching, then add some more loop cuts in the stretched areas. Scale each cube so they all have the same grid size. Unwrap the bottom of the bed using the same method. Now you replace the grid material with your wooden material. Remember, there are many free texture sites online. Just make sure the textures are good quality. Here is my scene after unwrapping and applying a simple wooden material to my bed frame and tables. For the drawer handles, I applied a simple metal material. Nothing fancy. As I wanted to make a scene similar to the first Paranormal Activity, I searched online for how they filmed the movie, such as what camera and aspect ratio they used. Thankfully, I found a site that lists aspect ratios and their equivalent. The aspect ratio for the first Paranormal Activity was 1.85, and the resolution equivalent is 1920 by 1038. So in the output properties, I changed the resolution to that. Then in the camera settings, I changed the focal length to 38mm and played around with the camera positioning until I got an angle I was happy with. I dimmed the power of the point light in my scene and also turned the strength to around 0.04 in the world properties. I used a nighttime HDRI from Polyhaven for my world lighting. Next, go into shading, change from object to world. Add a mix color node. Now you can add a tint color of your choice to your world lighting. Spend some time to play around with your scene lighting. Just don't brighten the scene up too much. Remember, it's gonna be a horror scene. I realized the door was looking quite basic, so with a reference image placed in front of the door, I went ahead and started making a paneled door. First, add loop cuts where the panels are on the reference image. Then select these 6 faces and inset them, and inset again. Select the middle ring of edges as shown, and move them back slightly. Select the 6 faces as shown, press Ctrl+ twice. Press Ctrl+B to bevel. Bevel it only slightly. Now let's unwrap the cushions, add a grid material like we did before. Open UV editing, select all, press U for unwrap, choose Smart UV Project. Go to shading, press Ctrl+Shift+T, add the textures. Scale the material to your liking. Duplicate it and replace the old one. Do the same thing for the larger cushions. I found a nice crease material online that helped add detail without actually increasing the poly count. To make the creases more realistic, I turned on proportional editing, turned down the size, and moved the verts around to make the creases stand out and more believable. I duplicated the cushion, mirrored it so it's harder to notice the duplication, and I replaced the old one. Use proportional editing again if you want to add a bit of indentation. Unwrap and put your materials on the bed covers. Remember to add a mix color node if you want to change the color. Next, unwrap the lampshade. Add basic materials to the base of the lamp and the mug, and the plugs, the light switch, and the boards. Make duplicates of the skirting board and add them to the second room. Duplicate the door and add that to the other room too. Add a material to the lamp wire and a simple metal material to the door handle. For the book, assign 2 materials using the plus icon. Now make a book cover material and a pages material. To assign these materials to specific parts of the prop, select faces and assign them. This pages texture set that I got online was really nice, but I had to do some adjustments. In mapping, I had to rotate, scale a bunch, and add a mix color to turn the pages more white. The last material I added was for the door. I just had a white color with a roughness of about 0.4. Now it's time to animate. And don't worry, this stage is pretty simple. For the doors, I turned on the auto keying function, selected Bezier, and rotated the door. Hopefully you paid attention earlier and place the origin for the door in the right place. A quick tip: try experimenting with some of the animation effects you have available. Finally, we are going to add the demonic entity. Thankfully, you can use a free site called Mixamo that allows you to pick a plethora of skins and animations. For my scene, I went with the Romero skin and the zombie idle animation and turned down the head direction. I went back into my project, imported the zombie with its animation, and placed it in a good spot. If you want the animation to be longer, you can copy and paste the keyframes. Next, make sure auto keying is turned on. Copy the first keyframe of the animation and paste it in the frame before. Then go to the frame before that and move the zombie out of view. Now you have this creepy section where the zombie is not there, then the door closes, then it opens, and the zombie is there in view, in the doorway. For this tutorial, I won't be telling you how to render your scene, but there's plenty of tutorials on YouTube. After rendering your scene, it's time to open your video editing software. I used Sony Vegas. Import your frames. Add them to the scene. For some final tweaks, I added some effects. These are not a must, but feel free to use them as well. Of course, it wouldn't be a paranormal activity scene without the timer in the corner. So with the help of YouTube and a YouTube video downloading site, I had what I wanted, only with an unwanted black bar. The solution to this is to add a chroma key or effect. Select the color picker icon and click the bar. For the sound effects, I went on YouTube, filtered by Creative Commons, and looked for keywords such as walking upstairs and door banging. Finally, I linked up the sounds to the animations, and there we go. You should have your very own paranormal activity-inspired scene. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hoped you learned something new. Enjoy your journey in learning Blender. See you next time.